Let's go ahead, I guess, and get started. I want to welcome all of you to the ending session of day one of the NIH Career Symposium. I'm Dr. Sharon Milgram. I direct the Office of Intramural Training and Education, and I have been at all, is it 15 or 16? I can't remember, but all of our career symposia. And all of them have been special in different ways, but I think the resilience of our community, the large number of you who have been with us today, the effort to share in both the actual sessions and in all of the various meetups, I think in many, many ways, this one will go down in history. Lori asked me to give a talk. It actually had an expletive in it. Why is this so? She used darn because she's from the Midwest, but we all know what she meant there. And I modified it a little bit. Why is this so hard? And more importantly, what can we do to make it easier? And it is not going to be a really data heavy talk or information heavy talk. And my hope is that I'll poke a little bit, you'll think of something as I talk, and then maybe through the chat and the Q&A, we can tackle some of the issues that make this difficult. I understand that it was a beautifully chaotic day today. A lot of people have been working very hard on the upside of this event to make sure that it works well and continues to work well. And I want to acknowledge especially three OITE staff, Lori Conlin, Jackie Newell Hunt, and Alexis Sherling, who have done a really remarkable amount of work. I think Lori attended the first career symposium as a visitor. We were talking about her move to the OITE, and it just so happened that she visited at that time, or maybe she wisely did it intentionally, I don't know, but she has been the magic behind all 15 or 16 years. Jackie and Alexis both worked with Lori really hard, making the platform work, getting all the invitations out, getting registrations done. And they've had support from many other OITE staff who you got to meet today. And I want to acknowledge all of them. I think at NIH, we like to say in the OITE, we have the best jobs of everyone at NIH. I think that's true. Our trainees are a really remarkably fun, energetic, smart, insightful, diverse group, and they drive lots of important activities on our campus. I won't read all of the names here on the slide, but I want to especially acknowledge the FELCOM Career Development Subcommittee who worked with OITE to make this happen. Every time Lori gave an update to our staff, she added and said, there are this many panelists and this many panelists and this many panelists. And I just want to acknowledge how very kind it is that so many individuals were willing to come and share their expertise with you. In many, many ways, they are paying it forward because many of them benefited years ago from the advice of other folks who came to various career activities or career symposia, et cetera. So I want to also acknowledge them. I also would like to thank all of you, the biomedical research workforce of the future, whether that be individuals doing research or supporting the doing of research, talking about the importance of research, whatever it is that you choose to do, you are our future. We are acutely aware of some of the issues that we have yet to resolve, that we have left in hopefully your good hands. You really represent an important element of problem solving in our country, from climate change to health disparities to the science underlying so many health issues. And so I also want to just thank all of you. So we're going to talk about job searches, and I think it's sort of obvious that transitions are never easy. And I think that's a really important beginning. When you think of transitions, you can actually think of a transition from the point that you are in one place and you need to get to the other. And there is all kinds of uncertainty and unknown in between. The place you're at, it may be wonderful, it may be really difficult, but in either case, it's what you know. And in many ways, letting go is a challenge. Letting go is more of a challenge when it's been a wonderful experience, but letting go of what we have is a challenge regardless. We are then looking towards something new with all kinds of uncertainty in between. And I like to think of it one of two ways. I like to think a lot in images, and one is those individuals on the trapeze, right? And they're swinging and then they let go and they grab on to another bar on another swing, right? And there is that moment in between where you literally hold your breath. Another way to think about transitions are to think about bridges. And so I just want to use that imagery here a little bit. And here's a pretty nice bridge, calm water, right? This would represent a job search experience that went pretty well, felt from really solid ground. Look at this bridge, plenty sturdy. Maybe there's even a guide on here talking with you about getting over the bridge. Maybe they're even going to walk over part of the bridge with you. There's no really, really rough water here. You're going to hit the other side and get on with things. Now, for some of you, this job search might feel a little bit more like this, right? This does not look like the easiest bridge to traverse. And I don't know about you, but I'm not that keen to drop into that water underneath. This bridge is swaying in the air, right? If it was windy, you might not really want to get onto it. It probably rolls some. It probably doesn't feel quite as easy to traverse as this bridge. And some of you are looking at a job search that feels much more like this type of transition. And some of you have no bridge at all. And there are just some slippery rocks in the water, or at least that's what it feels like, right? The water's running around, it's sort of cold, it's not even clear what rock you jump onto next, and you are hoping to get from where you are to where you want to go, navigating some pretty intense experiences in between. So transitions are always difficult. Job searches are difficult for everyone, but without a doubt, your specific situation determines the level of difficulty here. And some of that is out of your control. Things have happened, right? Or we're in the middle of a really difficult economic time, and you certainly don't control that. Elements of this transition are out of your control, but elements of it are in your control. And that's really the point. Not to say, this is an exciting time, embrace the excitement, let go of all of the worry, but to say, if we find room with curiosity for all of that worry, if we sit with it a little bit, if we talk about it, if we roll it around in our head and with others, we can take that worry and shrink it so that we can have the calmest, easiest transition possible. Maybe we're never going to get to this perfect, simple, beautiful, idyllic bridge. But that's the idea. There are a few really key concepts about job searches that we all have to keep in mind. And the first is that rejection is a part of the process, right? Nobody gets every job that they apply for. Rejection is just a part of the process. We could be a stellar candidate competing with many other stellar candidates, and something in our package is less attractive than something in another person's package. Or the hiring manager could say, this is terrible. There's lots of people I want to hire here, but I have to pick one. So rejection is a part of the process. And we get rejection even when we feel we've put our very best foot forward. The thing is that rejection brings up all kinds of uncomfortable emotions. And as humans, we would prefer to avoid uncomfortable emotions. The thing is that the anticipation of that rejection can keep us from applying. So we really have to look at ourselves and ask, what can I do to minimize the harsh, uncomfortable part of rejection, to try to find my growth mindset and learn through the rejection? How can I find a perspective that allows me to put on a really amazing job search, even though I know parts of it will be unbelievably uncomfortable? The second thing that brings up a lot of uncomfortable emotions around job searches is, like it or not, this is a time when we have to face constraints or things that hold us back. Some of those constraints are real, and some of them are assumed constraints. So by a real constraint, it might be geographic. My spouse doesn't want to move across the country. Our family is here. There are reasons why we need to stay in this place or restrict our search to this area. And that's a real constraint. There are some assumed constraints that I hear about. I'll give you an example there. A postdoc or grad student who doesn't have a great relationship with their PI, who says, I won't get a good letter and that will get in my way. And that may or may not be true. So that is an assumed constraint, right? Where we have to make sure to question. The thing is, the key thing about constraints is to identify them, to ask ourselves, real or assumed, what can I do about them? Some constraints we can't do anything about. Some constraints we can actually work on or work with. The third key thing to keep in mind about job searches is there's simply just a lot we can't control, right? From who's hiring, to timelines, to whether our timeline works well with the timeline of the hiring folks. There are so many things here we can't control. The key is, first of all, to appreciate that. And then second of all, to focus on what we can control. One other thing about what we can't control is our on paper record, our experiences. I mean, they are what they are. We can look now and work to make change, but one of the things we can't control is things that happened long in the past that are a part of our record. The number of papers that we have, whether we were able to get sufficient leadership experience, whether we have enough teaching experience. So we can't control what happened in the past, right? We can't go back and undo it, but we can focus on what we can control now. And if we learn that something is really a constraint holding us back, the beauty of being open to facing constraints is the minute we face them, we have the potential to address the ones that can be addressed moving forward. And so a lot of the rejection and the discomfort is these three things wrapped up together. The last thing that I want to point out, as I spend a lot of time talking with fellows about job searches, and one of the things I've realized is we need to start talking about the me part of the job search and the we part of the job search. So the me part is all of the things I really want to do, the strengths and liabilities of my package, how I'm going to navigate both my work and applications, how am I going to present myself, develop my whole job search skill set. But then there's a we part of this. And some of that we is family. Where do we want to live? What do we want to do? How does my job search influence my family dynamic, right? Or my desire to have family and meet someone, and where I move could influence that. So even I think, at my first job search for a faculty member, I was single, but in many ways, there was still this back of my mind, we issue. So that's one we issue. But the second we issue is the issue of the scientific community, us together. And that's what I want to talk about next. And I want to talk about that from this simple statement at the beginning, and that is that fish don't see water, right? The fish live in the sea or the fish tank or the aquarium, and they don't even notice the water around them. So when you think about that, rather than thinking about fish, just see it this way: we don't fully see our culture. We are immersed in this culture of science that has sent us so many messages about our worth based on how we do science and what we choose to do in the long term. And we are so immersed in that culture that we don't see our culture. And when I talk about this being a me and a we issue, I actually think the scientific culture is a big part of the we issue. So fish don't see water. One of the most important messages that we get from the moment we say, I'd like to do research, I'd like to get a PhD, I'd like to engage in the biomedical research community, one of the messages we constantly get is that there is a hierarchy in career outcomes. There are better and worse career choices. The language of alternative career has been in this field for 20 years, and it is really not helpful. There is no such thing as an alternative career. And if someone is telling you that you are better or worse for the career that you choose, they are really not your ally or supporter or mentor. But fish don't see the water, right? And we don't see how insidious and difficult all of the messages of careers are. We don't even realize how much we've internalized, to the point that I have, beyond the discussion of I don't want to be an academic scientist, right? I want to do something else. There's that stress. But even within academic job searches, there's the stress of, oh, this isn't such a good place, right? My PI or my thesis advisor has said, why would you want to go to a place like that? So the hierarchy of careers in our culture is a big reason why this is so darn hard, okay? And it's a really key thing. So unless you think of the word alternative in a cool way, like alternative energy, right, you should really let go of the entire concept. And quite frankly, there is no reason for us to use any modifier for the word career. We should just say we are at the stage of looking for a job. We're interested in a career in policy, in law, in research, in a biotech startup company, whatever. Right? We should lose the language. The thing is, because as a community, we're stuck on this idea, we get caught in a lot of ways. And I want to go ahead and talk about two of those ways, right? And so we're caught in this idea that our self-worth is tied to which career choice we make. Furthermore, where within that career choice we land. So because we're so sort of have been in a culture sending so many messages about that, we get really caught. And we get caught in two ways. So the first is what's called the streetlight effect. And I hear about this a lot, right? And so there's a story out there. There's actually multiple stories. The modern story is that somebody is looking for their car keys under a streetlight, and somebody passes by and says, hey, what are you looking for? And the person says, oh, I'm looking for my keys. And then the other the other person says, did you drop him here? And the person says, no, I dropped him over there, but there's much better light here. There's an idea here, right? That sometimes we look in this really narrow field simply because it's convenient, in this case, because there's light. But for us, we look at a narrow set of career options because our culture has told us to do that. Our culture doesn't say, turn 360, look everywhere. Consider carefully the life you want. Consider carefully the skills you want to use every day. Consider carefully how you want to integrate your life into your work. Consider carefully who you are and pick anything. Our culture says, look here in this narrow, constrained area. And so I think that if we keep this image in mind, we can ask ourselves a couple questions about where we're at right now in career searching and considering our options. And one is, why am I looking wherever I'm looking? Who told me to look here? Are there other places I want to look? And what is holding me back from looking where I want to look? Self-awareness of the influence of culture and softening the influence of that culture allows us to expand our search outside of that narrow, arc of light from the headlight or lamp or whatever you want to call it. So there's the first thing that I really want to encourage you all to do. At the end of the Career Symposium, ask yourself, have you expanded your horizons? Or have you realized that somebody's driving you towards a horizon that doesn't interest you at all? So many people say to me, I don't want to let down, fill in the blank, usually my PI or my thesis advisor. The only person who needs to be happy with your career choice is you. And I think a big element of career satisfaction and success is embracing that idea. The other thing that I think we get caught in because of our culture is sunk cost fallacy. I learned about this, I think it was actually last year. Anna Hahn and Denise Saunders, to the OITE staff, gave a talk on the psychology of career decision-making. And I never had these words. I've always had the idea in my head, but I've never, ever had the words. And I think this is really powerful. So sunk cost fallacy is a cognitive distortion that tells us, oh, I invested so much already, so I'm not going to change directions now. I'm not going to walk away from this now. I've put so much time and energy into this that I can't possibly change direction. But the thing is, look at this pile of money and imagine that you keep going in a direction you don't want to go, using it all up, right? So you've stuck with it simply because of this distorted thinking, right? And every day you live the consequence of that. I think, again, a really key thing is to go back to fish don't see the water, right? Fish aren't aware of the water. I don't think we are aware of how much pressure the community puts on us career-wise. And when we are aware of it, often what it causes is this discomfort and we shut down. And so I actually don't think the discomfort can go away. What I am advocating for is, instead of feeling uncomfortable and shutting down, that we feel uncomfortable and that we pause and say, so what about the culture here is driving this? What part of this is me? What part is we? And what am I going to do with this? Because career decision-making has to be made for us and not for the broader, culture. Like, we're not deciding to go to work every day to satisfy our PI. We're deciding to go to work every day to take care of ourselves, to contribute the way we want to contribute, to have the life we want to have. So none of this is actually very easy. And I don't think at this point, I have said anything that makes it any easier, except perhaps to say out loud what a lot of people wish we were saying more often. So maybe that makes it a little bit easier. But I want to talk a little bit about what does make this easier, and then I'll attend to things in the chat a little bit and the Q&A a little bit. So I am I'm on the Outer Banks in Duck, North Carolina this week with my wife and her parents. And it turns out that unusual for May is incredible nor'easter. So incredible winds are coming from Canada, hitting the warm air in the Atlantic Ocean, and it is absolutely outrageously windy. And so I've been thinking a lot about wind, and we were out all bundled up walking, and look at these trees. Right? Wind reshapes landscapes is sort of the message that I want to give here. These trees are totally bent over as a result of spending all of their time in an environment where you can have nor'easters and heavy winds all the time. Some of the trees, I mean, I didn't catch it in this picture, are almost touching the ground. Parts of their are literally horizontal. Their branches. So wind reshapes landscapes. And what I mean by that is this: the way to deal with all of the difficulty of job searches and all of the difficulty that the culture of science brings us is to appreciate that in many, many ways, this is a part of work. This is a part of life, right? We experience stress. We get all of these messages. We have our own internal landscape, right? I mean, we all wish we had the perfect job application packet that, we send off an application. Oh, we want them to call us tomorrow and say, gosh, thank you, we want you, right? So let's just acknowledge the difficulty. So there's stress. Stress alone by itself doesn't do a whole lot for us. In fact, it really makes it hard to thrive. But if we look at the stress, we find support, and we take good care of ourselves, then we have the chance of something known as stress-related growth. These trees are reshaped by the landscape, in large part because of other trees around them. So one thing you can't see here are the really older trees partially buffering these trees. Stress plus support plus well-being leads to stress-related growth. Having the ability to have a conversation with ourselves and others about what motivates us in life. Being able to explore the careers we want, to silence some of the chatter of others. The ability to look at what is holding us back and what we can do about that. So I think it's a really key point: support plus well-being. What makes a job search easier is being a part of a proactive, positive community like the one that has formed spontaneously over the last day. It is being a part of the community on your campus, together in person, on Zoom, supporting each other, attending career activities, talking about careers, pointing out to each other when unconscious bias about various careers creeps into the conversation. So support or community, plus well-being, taking good care of yourself, your mental health, your physical health, your emotional health, your spiritual health. When we take care of ourselves, when we are a part of a community, then we take the stress we have and we use it and grow. Another way to think about this, those of you who've been part of the Resilient Scientist series have heard, resilience is people plus process plus preparation. So these trees, I mean, this is a picture of resilience, right? They were bent by the wind and they found a way to keep standing. They're actually quite healthy, beautiful trees. It's pretty amazing to look at. So we get really caught up in job searches in a lot of negative space. And I think that we can pull ourselves out of that negative space much easier when we are surrounding ourselves with helpful people, when we are taking good care of ourselves, right? So the process here would be really, again, attached to that well-being. And when we prepare by taking care of ourselves, by coming to events like these, then a job search, still difficult, still causes discomfort, still has its very stressful moments, but it becomes something that we manage, that we embrace, that we grow through. This really takes, I think, three things. And none of these things make the hard part go away. They just make the hard part really manageable. Maybe sometimes we can even laugh through a few of the hard parts. So I want to, again, just stress the idea that the hard part, that, why is this darn hard? Because transitions are hard. But these three things can make it a lot easier. So one part when it comes to job searches, the preparation is really to embrace learning job search skills. And there are really, well, maybe you would list some more, but I think these are 5 really key ones: the ability to network, doing informational interviews, preparing appropriate job search documents, learning to interview, and learning to negotiate. These are all learned skills, right? And they take some preparation. So one thing to make this easier is to embrace lifelong learning and to see that career decision-making and job searching is a work skill, just like writing is a work skill, just like teaching is a work skill. Whatever skills you have to do your job have to be supported by skills to carry out job searches and to advance in your career. You then want to add something. And a lot of times we skip this part because this is somewhat of the uncomfortable part. We really need to spend time cultivating attitudes that drive a search that leads us toward satisfaction and happiness. And I say more often than not, because no work makes us happy all the time. I do think there are some people who might, if they were given millions of dollars, would choose to work. But let's be honest, many of us would choose to do something else if we didn't need some of the material elements of work. So I just want to acknowledge that we're not always satisfied and happy. But what we want is to be satisfied and happy more often than not. And I've thought about these things. So introspection is the ability to really sit and pay attention to our thought processes, our feelings, what's going on for us. Introspection is an element of or leads to, in many ways, self-awareness. I wanted to separate them because I think a lot of times when we say self-awareness, we go right to skills. And the honest truth is that's a pretty easy element of all of this. All right, we can, with some coaching, learn to describe our skills in an application, to talk about it in an interview. I think introspection is paying a lot more attention to our discomforts, to what really makes us tick, to the things that maybe are an innate part of our personality that are holding us back a little bit, and parts that we want to soften a little bit, our perfectionism or our rigidity, right? So I wanted to separate out introspection and self-awareness to sort of give this sense of going deep into what makes me tick, what really drives me. Do I want work to be a big part of my life or a less big part of my life? And I'm surrounded by people who think it should be a really big part. So how does that make me feel? So that's a little bit why I listed both of those. We need much more curiosity in our job search. Why am I considering this? What about this would be attractive? What wouldn't be attractive to me? I wonder why I am holding off on talking with my PI about this. Curiosity, I think, leads to self-compassion. And the idea behind self-compassion is, well, we don't have perfect records. Some of our constraints are constraints because of things that have happened to us, because of things that we have, even if we haven't contributed to it, that we experienced. Some parts of our constraints are related to gaps, lack of skills, whatever. There's an element of saying we are who we are, a mix of come easies and come hards, a mix of strengths and liabilities. And we are going to put our best foot forward, knowing that there is no perfect foot forward. And I think self-compassion helps us let go of the perfectionism that makes this so very hard. There's an element of acceptance and flexibility in job searches. Never more than during the pandemic has it required flexibility. We're going to bring you in person. Oh no, we're going to do it via Zoom. Can you adapt and do it this way? There's all kinds of flexibility. Acceptance tied in many ways to constraints, tied to the fact that we're not in control of all of this. Acceptance of the discomfort, right? Leaning into the discomfort. It's stressful to do informational interviews. We hear that stress and discomfort. We feel that stress and discomfort, so we don't do them, right? Acceptance that that's not helpful, and self-compassion to go the opposite way is what we need to have a successful job search. So when we get a message that we should avoid, the first thing we should do is pause and be curious about, well, would avoiding really be helpful? And in the case of those informational interviews, probably not. This feels uncomfortable, so I'm going to find a way to manage that stress and do it anyway. And I think there's some acceptance that goes with doing that. Scientists, we like to focus on the job search skills part. Those are pretty much more manageable than these things here. Now, the third thing that we need are to find the right mentors. And I have two things to say about that. I talked about the fish in the water. Another part of our culture that isn't helpful is this idea that our PI, first of all, that relationship matters forever. It hardly ever does. Most people move on and lose contact. Second of all, that person is the perfect career mentor for us. That is a completely outdated model. How could your PI be a career mentor when they know not much more than you about careers beyond the one that they have themselves? They are not experts in career mentoring. They have looked under a narrow set of lamps themselves, right? Or streetlights themselves. This model of PI as career mentor really needs to be thrown out. Even when you think you can get some quality career mentoring from your PI, you should seek input from more people as well. It doesn't have to be, that you don't talk to your PI at all about your career, but this idea that our PI will meet our career needs really needs to be thrown out, just like the whole thing of hierarchy of careers. Both of these are outdated ideas. There are lots of options for career mentors, people on your campus, in your postdoc office or grad school office, through scientific societies. All of them have amazing career development programming at their national meetings. Lots of them do monthly during the year via webinars. There's usually a student or trainee committee you can join to get involved. There are resources at NIH for intramural fellows, our career center, all of the programming we offer for non-intramural fellows. A lot of our material is on YouTube. There's lots of resources online. There's a lot of career mentoring that can come from peers, job search groups, meeting and supporting each other, near peers, right? People who left your research group or left your campus a few years before. and really actually even mentors in your personal life. Maybe the person standing next to you on the soccer field works at the FDA or has been at the World Bank and thought about global health and banking, right? Who knows who's out there that can do an informational interview, give you some guidance, etc. We need a model of a whole team behind us as we're looking for jobs. When we have a focus on these three areas, we have two possibilities. And one is that we're going to tell ourselves a more realistic and supportive story about our job search. We're going to accept the gaps. We're going to learn how to talk about them. We're going to be much more sort of engaged in accepting what we can and can't control, focused on taking care of ourselves, right? We have a much better chance of telling a more realistic and supportive story about the search itself. But most importantly, if we do this well and we embrace these skills, we have this chance of writing a long-term story of our life. And that life is a life full of purpose and joy, with lots of ouches and lots of difficulty. But generally, we look at the work we do and we say, I found something that really works for me. And so I think it is really important that we embrace the idea of taking good care of ourselves and of reaching out and of making sure we don't feel so alone. I think it's also important that we look at what parts of our culture make this especially hard, and that we work as a community to point out those negative things and to do what we can to change that culture. All of you are mentors for people coming behind you. And so ask yourself what biases you have about various career options. Ask yourself where they came from and how to soften them, because I think that we all can work to make this easier for each other. And so I thought I would end with challenging you to pick something that you are going to do to reshape your landscape, i.e., what are you going to do to change your approach to how you are thinking about career development, how you're thinking of career decision-making, and what you want to do to reshape your landscapes. So I'm going to open the Q&A. And try to address some of your questions. I think that's the last slide, and so I'll stop sharing for now. All right, so we have a little bit of time, and I'm going to try to address some of the questions. So sometimes I have a hard time differentiating between perseverance and sunk cost fallacy. Any thoughts on how to avoid such confusion? You know, I think that that's a quite accurate dilemma to point out, right? On the one hand, we don't want to give up. On the other hand, we don't want to hold on so long and then say, damn, I should have given up a while back. So a couple of things. There's part of that I think requires a lot of deep introspection. And I think sometimes that comes very easily through journaling. Sometimes that comes through therapy. Sometimes that comes from talking with a mentor who asks good curiosity questions, right? To help, to help decide, am I right in going on here? The other thing there, I think sometimes is really effective, is to try on the opposite approach. So, right, I'm persevering. So you know what? I'm going to pause for a moment and put that on the back burner and explore some other things. I'm going to see if I ever go back to that. And that's another way to help. The third thing that helps with perseverance versus sunk cost fallacy are informational interviews. And afterward, especially if it's about a career path, right? Going on those interviews and then asking yourself afterward how it felt, right? Did it really am I excited or not? So am I hearing all these things and saying, oh, doesn't excite me, but oh, I'm going to keep going, right? That's an example of where insight helps. So hopefully that those are some helpful ideas. Here's a message from a student who's just starting or going to start in the fall. So good on you for coming early and getting this kind of information at the outset. My greatest fear is not having time for professional development outside of the research and classes, not having a PI that's supportive of that. Can you highlight strategies to change that way of thinking? So actually, first, let me say, I think that that's pretty reasonable thing to be worried about, right? There is a lot on your plate as a graduate student and a lot of things that compete for your time. And you didn't mention life, but that will also compete with your time. I think a key there is to put that worry aside for a moment and say, so when faced with a problem, where do I have control? And one key place that you have control there is finding a supportive mentor who believes that career development is important. You should be asking about that as you talk to PIs. You should be talking to folks in your research group and asking if they do things, right? You want someone to help you balance, but I think that one element here where you have control, for those of you who are not in a group already, you have the ability to do your best to find a group that supports your career development. The other thing when it comes to that question is often we come at that from this perspective of scarcity. Oh, I don't have time. And I think that's human nature. I have this piece of art from artist Louise Bourgeois, and it's like a face in like 5 different angles, right? And I like to use it to remind me to change my perspective. So I might say, if I feel like I don't have time for this, okay, that's one perspective. Now, another one is, can I find time? How can I find time? What would be the best way to prioritize? Is now a good time to do this or not? And so I would use that feeling of not having enough time, find that curiosity and ask yourself some questions about finding time. Do you have any advice on narrowing career options when the amount of, I think it's probably options are endless, particularly if you're not quite sure what the long-term career you want to end up in is. I think the way to do this is to start broad. Early on, before you have really decided, you should go and try a lot of different things. And by try, I mean you go to a panel discussion and you listen to some things, right? And you pay attention and you walk away. And again, curiosity. Did that excite me? Was I bored? Did that seem awful? You know, one time I had this idea I was going to go to law school and go into education law. And then I was invited to UAB to give for a career symposium, and the panel before me was on law. And first of all, they were all dressed like in suits and I was in jeans. And I thought, ooh, I'd have to wear clothes every day. But second of all, they talked about what they did. And I was like, no, never mind. So we can sometimes rule something out very, very quickly through these kinds of panels and listening to different people, some informational interviews. When you cross something off, you put it off to the side. As it narrows, you work with a career counselor to really talk through each of the options, to do informational interviews, maybe to try to get some hands-on experience. People come to talk to us in OITE and say, maybe we like your job. Well, how can you try on a job like ours, right? Get on a committee and plan events, shadow us in an admissions process. And so that's what you do. Now, sometimes you can't get hands-on experience, and the best you can do are talk to people, right? Some of you are in academic environments and there's no easy way to get into industry for a month to try it on. Wouldn't that be great if you were at a school that let you do that? Then it's really important to do that. But if you can't, we try to learn indirectly through informational interviews. And I think that is probably the best way to go from very broad to more narrow. And career counselors, they help people do that all the time. Do you have advice on how to transition from academia to other fields when these other paths ask you to have a degree and you know you're qualified, you just don't have the diploma? Sometimes I think a question it requires the answer of it depends and is context specific. And some, depending on where you're at in your education, it's important to say, do I need a PhD if I want to do X, Y, or Z? But most of you here are finished, and now you're looking to get a leg in and maybe don't want to get the education that they require. So lots of informational interviews, talking to people about other approaches, maybe an evening course that shows an interest, maybe a certificate program, maybe being very transparent about that and asking, are there other things that I can do to get my foot in the door? There are a variety of ways to do that. Generally, all of them begin with informational interviews. And if people say, look, everyone in our field has this degree, then you need to ask yourself, am I willing to get this degree? For every person who went a traditional path, there's a person who went a different path. And you want to try to find some of those individuals as well. How should we look for postdoc choices? See where our work would be more impactful immediately or more about our long-term goals. I think that it, again, is pretty context specific. Depending on what you want to do, I think graduate students should pick a postdoc, keeping in mind some of their broader career options, but not totally tied to that. So, for example, you might say, I want to go to industry. Right? I know I'm going to work in industry in the long term. Well, then it might be very, very wise to choose a postdoc in industry. Alternatively, you could find a lab in academia that interests you, that has collaborators in industry, a school that has a great industry postdoc program. So I think the way you choose your postdoc should be tied some to your future goals, but not so tightly. Do you have any advice about inviting feedback after a rejection? Understanding why people thought you were not competitive or a good fit would be incredibly helpful. As far as I know, almost no one is willing to provide this type of information to applicants. I read that and it makes me think of the hirings I've done and when I've potentially let people down by not responding to their questions. I have to say that very few people ask, and I think that it would be a great thing to ask. You might not get anything, in which case you're going to need to let go. But it is worth sending an email that says, thank you for letting me know, so that I can learn from the process. Would you be willing to give me some honest feedback? And I think some people are likely to take you up on that. The honest truth is often where it becomes towards the end, as people narrow down, there are so many intangibles that a lot of times you do need to just hear, you had what we wanted, somebody else just also did, or they had this slightly different, better, unique skill set. Where I think you can get a lot of feedback is by doing more informational interviews earlier in the process. If you were hiring someone and you saw my resume, what would you say? And while that doesn't replace what you want, the feedback at the end, I do think it prepares you in a really positive way. I still feel a little guilty taking time out to attend to career development activities instead of doing research, even though I'm leaning away from faculty. They pay me and need publications for site visits. I wish there was a calculation X hours per year for career activities so we can attend things. So I would like to say that I think regardless of what career direction people are heading, they need time away for career development. They need leadership and management and emotional intelligence training and resilience training, all kinds of things. I think that we should stop feeling like that's a luxury and we should start saying it is a responsibility. The other thing that I'll say about that is none of us satisfy our boss all of the time. And often we exaggerate how unhappy our boss is. And so I think that it's important to let go of the PI element of all of that. The personal guilt part, I think that maybe reframing that to a responsibility would help. Asking yourself, is this a good week or not? Could I put this off or not? There are ways to soften that, but ultimately, life is all about choices, right? When we do something, we are not attending to something else. And what we want to do is be intentional about that. Do you have any advice on needing to enter a job search while feeling burned out? I do have some advice about that. I have to say that it worries me a lot when I work with trainees, where I think underneath this lethargy and disheartened view is a really talented person, and people are gonna struggle to see that. So I think the first thing is to find all of the well-being and emotional support you need to take care of yourself. You need to surround yourself with self-care strategies. If nature is what supports you, you got to get out. Music, you got to find time. You really have to deal with the burnout. You also need support during the job search so that you find ways to put aside some of those negative feelings. And the best way to put them aside is to talk it through. We have this idea if we stuff down what's making us unhappy, that it's going to help, but it's just the opposite. Remember, I said when we feel like we don't want to do something, we should turn towards it and do it. When we feel that we want to ignore something, that's when we need to say, "Ooh, wait a minute. Let me find a supportive person to talk this through with." And so I would say that there's a lot of self-care going on to deal with burnout. That is the way we deal with burnout. I also think if you have a supportive PI, an honest conversation with them about healthy boundaries while you process that burnout is really important. What should I do if I am overqualified in a job, but I'm actually really interested in it? I think that career counselors can help with this a lot. Phrasing making your cover letter, highlight your commitment to the job, the way you talk to people, both in informational interviews and as you actually talk to hiring managers is really, really important. I think there's also an element there of saying, am I so over-educated and overqualified that I need to sit with that and decide if it's appropriate? I do think there's an element of that as well. There's some people asking, oh, here it is. There's some people saying, answer the salary question. Is the NIH going to address the salary disparities of NIH stipend guidelines for postdocs? Approximately $50K per year, which is what most PIs follow. It's so hard to actually live in the DMV metro area. As someone who comes from a background without a financial safety net, the postdoc salary is what's driving me currently to need to leave academia for financial survival. Is something being done? or can there be something done to address this? I can't talk for extramural NIH, who sets stipend policies through NRSAs and awards to extramural fellows. Within the intramural program, I can tell you that there's a committee that talks a lot about equity, that looks at housing costs. We have tried for several years to sort of get ahead of the curve and increase salaries. We've talked a lot about paying people at the top of a band, pay band, not at the bottom, working with both top down, talking about it with scientific directors, but also bottom up individual PIs. I think it would be really inappropriate for me to argue that this isn't something, we could put this on a back burner. I think it would be completely inappropriate to argue this isn't a really serious thing at a time when inflation is in, 6%, 7%. And so we are aware. We have just issued your paycheck in June should have an increase, and we will keep working on that. And I will remember the question. I am on a lot of committees. I just spoke to the NIH Equity Committee this week. I brought up stipends, and I will keep reminding people that this is an issue. When the job search leaves us unemployed for a couple of months, what's the best way to explain it? I actually think that the best way is to say my contract ran out. Here is how I've been productive in the last few months. I think that many employers are well aware of how difficult times are, how much the pandemic has influenced job searches. I think that what you want to do is be as productive as you can be in that interim time. I think that that's a key thing. And also to practice ways of talking about it that come off that you are calm, intentional, that you that you are really proactively looking forward. And I think that that's a really good strategy. One other thing, and I don't always like the special volunteer category. At NIH, you can stay as a volunteer. At many universities, you can do the same thing. Sometimes that allows you to present to the outside world a continuation, right? You're finishing up, but you are, also looking for something else. Do you have any advice for those who don't want to do a postdoc before trying to enter the workforce? Yes, do informational interviews with other people who entered the workforce without doing a postdoc. You will hear from many of them how that they were successful, and some tips on how, like getting some volunteer experience during grad school. The OITE has several people we hired right out of their PhD. I know graduate students who went right to other types of jobs, into management and policy internships and work right out of grad school. Find those individuals on LinkedIn, find them here today, start another meetup for people interested in going right from grad school to the workforce. It is, the first question shouldn't be, what postdoc am I going to do? It should be, do I need to do a postdoc? Could you describe what an informational interview is? I'm a starting PhD student, not familiar with that. So informational interview is when you go and interview someone about their job and their career path, and you ask them for advice if you were interested in entering the field. And if you go to our YouTube channel, I'm sure that you can find a webinar on informational interviews. I suspect that there's a guide to informational interviews on our website. And if you Google informational, and there, somebody just put it in, thank you very, very much. Any advice on what to do when feeling unaligned, trying to finish a postdoc, trying to transition to industry? Should we tell our PI? You know, I actually think that the decision to share or not share is very context specific, but generally, I think that when we are open about our career aspirations and our career goals, it means that we aren't feeling shame. Shame makes us hide. So when we tell someone, then we can embrace what we're doing. So personally, I think that letting people know what you're looking for is an element of self-acceptance. I also think people like to hire people they know, even indirectly, and everyone you tell that you're looking might know someone who might be, have a position. So personally, I think we should tell everyone very loudly and very often what we're looking for. That said, I acknowledge that each of you has the PI you have, and some of them are difficult, and you might decide that person's not worth it. Then tell all the other mentors that you know, everyone else that can support you. So Lori, I think that we are out of time.
We are out of time today. There is lots more tomorrow, and we'll actually do some of the things folks are asking about, informational interviews, etc. Have a little bit of that on the hiring trends session tomorrow afternoon. And also I posted in the chat our YouTube page, which has all of those things. So Sharon, thank you so much for talking from the beach. It's been fantastic.
It was good to be here. I will try to download the Q&A and answer directly the folks that I haven't answered. Obviously, I can't do that to people who posted anonymously, but you can email me. Here's my email address, and I will do my best to answer, probably in a few days. So everyone have a wonderful rest of the Career Symposium and take good care.
All right. Bye, everyone.